Do you sense that? Something is in the air. Something dark and haunting. You feel something inside of you rising up. Something monstrous that grows stronger as the moon rises. This time of the year when spirits are free, when the supernatural is everywhere, you can feel the beast inside of you crying out. A beast that is hungry with claws and fangs pushing through your skin as you feel a desire to feed, a need to fight, to rip and scratch and howl, but most of all, a need to be 90s and metal as f***. Oh, that's right, it's Halloween, our favorite time of the year. But this Halloween is extra special, because it marks the 25th anniversary of one of the most unique fighting games ever. A game that was distinctly 90s, while at the same time being timeless in how original it was. And a game that was huge for me when I was a kid, and I've been looking forward to talking about ever since we started this show. Ladies, gentlemen, zoanthropes of all ages, join me, won't you, as we get in touch with our inner beast in this, the Bloody Roar Retrospective. The 90s was a time when everyone was getting into the fighting game scene. It didn't matter what company you worked for, someone there was making a fighting game. It didn't matter what property you owned, someone was trying to pitch it as a fighting game. Well, around the middle of the decade, Hudson, the company who at the time was mostly known for pumping out tiny adorable mascot games such as Bonk's Adventure, Adventure Island, and of course their flagship title, Bomberman, decided they wanted to make their foray into fisticuffs. So they reached out to fellow developers, Rising, who they had previously worked with on Bomberman Panic Bomber. Now, Rising was still a relatively new company at this point, having only formed a few years before this when several developers from Compile, the company behind Puyo Puyo, split off to go in different directions. Which I am bringing up right now just to point out the fact that the people who used to make this...
Fire! Ice storm! Full power!
were about to make this. Just wanted to make sure everyone had that in their minds as this video went forward. So Hudson and Rising were teaming up on this new venture, and each company chose a representative to pair up and direct the game together. The Rising representative was Susumu Hibi, and Hudson's representative was Kenji Fukuya. Now, even though they worked together on the creation of this game, when you look into it, it quickly becomes clear this was Fukuya's baby. I say this because Fukuya kept working as the director of Bloody Roar throughout its entire history, while Hibi stepped back and gave up some of his responsibility after the second game. Plus, Hibi worked on multiple other video games throughout his career, while Fukuya really only worked on Bloody Roar. Seriously, the Bloody Roar series is all he has on his resume except for 3 thank yous on earlier Hudson games. But more importantly, listen, you're looking at the footage of this game, you know what this game is, you know the crazy idea behind it and the tone and aesthetic that it has, and after researching these two guys, yeah, Fukuya just screams, I'm the guy that made Bloody Roar. Here's a few facts about Kenji Fukuya. He made this game when he was only 23, which probably explains the youthful, rebellious aesthetic the game has. He would go on to be a pro Bloody Roar player going under the pseudonym The Beast King. When interviewed for V-Jump magazine, he was described as, quote, a hard drinker from Hokkaido who developed Bloody Roar in pursuit of the perfect game. And in that same interview, when he was asked to list off his favorite things, he replied with sake and Genghis Khan. Yeah, I'll be real with you. When I started researching this game, I thought, oh, there has to be some wild story behind how they came up with the idea of a fighting game with humans that turn to animals. There's gotta be some crazy explanation for how they came up with that idea. But after learning about Kenji Fukuya, Yeah, I think he just wanted to make a game about wolfmen beating up lion dudes. That just feels like his vibe. He's probably had that idea in his head ever since he was in middle school. And so, in 1997, this brand new venture from a company with zero fighting game experience and another company who used to make goo-themed puzzle games, being headed up by a heavy-drinking Genghis Khan fan, hit arcades, and the result was something the fighting game community had never seen before. The first Bloody Roar was released in arcades on July 7th, 1997 and released on the PlayStation 1 on October 31st of the same year. Yeah, that's right, when I said Halloween was the 25th anniversary, I wasn't kidding. They put out the game where you play as a werewolf on Halloween. They knew exactly what they were doing with that release date. Although, before we go any further, I should probably mention the thing that I'm sure many of you have already spammed in the comments. Yes, when this game was released in arcades in North America, it wasn't called Bloody Roar. Its name was changed to Beasterizer, which is just perfect. Don't get me wrong, I definitely prefer Bloody Roar. It holds up way better to the test of time. But Bloody Roar was a series that was loaded with 90s aesthetic. And if you want to talk about a title that just screams 90s edgelord, it's Beasterizer. I can just see the boardroom meeting where the American executive stands up and says, Bloody Roar? No. You can't slap that name on a skateboard and surround it with lightning. Now, Beasterizer, that's a game you can play while drinking a Mountain Dew and riding a BMX bike. The game was set in a world where a race known as zoanthropes exist. These are humans who have the ability to transform into animal-human hybrids. For ages, these zoanthropes have lived in secret, but over the past few years, more and more people have discovered that they carry the the zoanthrope gene, and are awakening to their lycanthropic powers. Well, what happens when suddenly a group of people discover that they have superpowers? A giant megacorporation is going to try and take advantage of it. In comes the Tylon Company, a biochemical corporation looking to use the zoanthropes to engineer a race of super soldiers to sell to militaries around the world. And if you want to know why so many zoanthropes are suddenly emerging, well, the game doesn't really explain it, but back in the 90s, if you went to Bloody Roar's website, you would find a long description about how mankind was destroying the planet, implying that either global warming is causing it, or that nature is creating zoanthropes to try and fight back against man. Yeah, it's not really explained beyond that. The Tylon Corporation begins kidnapping zoanthropes, leading to 8 fighters going to war, either trying to investigate Tylon or fighting on the company's behalf. There's the game's protagonist, Hugo, a zoanthrope with the power to turn to a wolf, who is setting out to find his father, a mercenary who was kidnapped by Tylon. Joining him is his father's old war buddy, the French soldier Gatto, who, surprise surprise, is also a zoanthrope with the power to turn to a lion. After this is Alice the rabbit. Alice was kidnapped as a child and experimented upon by Tylon. She was able to escape, but a friend of hers, Yuriko, wasn't so lucky, so Alice is heading back to Tylon's base to try and rescue her. And she's not the only one going back for Yuriko. Yuriko's mother, Mitsuko the boar, is also making her way to the base to get her daughter back. I remember when I was a kid, I was actually surprised by Mitsuko, and even still this day, I'm pretty impressed with Hudson for creating her. This was a time when 99% of all fighting game women were young, slender supermodels or perky pop stars. So creating a middle-aged buff woman who looks like she knows how to kick ass was brand new. Good for you, Bloody Roar. Now, those were the heroes of the game, but Tylon had their own zoanthrope soldiers. From Britain, there was the sadistic assassin Hans, who goes by the codename Fox. Guess what they turned to? Then there's Bakoryu the Mole, another assassin, although he pairs up with Tylon because he wants them to pump him full of drugs so that way they can turn him into the ultimate zoanthrope soldier. Which is understandable. If I found out that I could turn into an animal only to learn it was a blind creature that lives in the dirt, I'd probably be asking for an upgrade too. In all honesty though, Bakoryu was my favorite back in the day. His giant claws were so fun to swing around, and he's got some of the best throw animations in the game. And the last of these assassins is Long the Tiger, although it's more accurate to call him a former assassin. Yes, Long was a master of martial arts, and as such he became the strongest assassin in his guild, even going on to work for the Tylon Corporation. But after years of dirty deeds, Long has come to regret his past and decides he wants to atone for his sins, so he leaves the Assassin's Guild and decides to fight back against Tylon. This is an interesting collection of characters, because typically in a fighting game you really only get 2 or 3 characters with some kind of a connection to the plot, but here every single character has some kind of a reason for fighting, some reason for either going against or working for Tylon. Except for the 8th character, Greg the Gorilla. Yeah, he's there because his circus is going out of business and he wants to convince other zoanthropes to join and perform for him. He has zero connection to what is going on with Tylon, but hey, every game needs its comedic relief, and Giant Monkey Man who attacks you with his butt certainly fits that description. Also, small detail, but Greg's hat falls off whenever he gets knocked down, and I remember as a kid trying to make it through an entire match without losing that hat. Never did it once. Now, the cast was certainly memorable, but what really stood out about Bloody Roar was the gameplay. There were 3 basic buttons, punch, kick, and a beast button. As you fought, you would build up a beast gauge, and once it had filled up, you could hit the beast button to transform into your animal state. While in this form, not only would your stats shift around, such as giving you stronger attacks or longer range, but also you would recover back any recently lost health, and your beast button would act as a 3rd attack. You could also press your 4th button to activate Rave Mode. While in this mode, your attacks would be faster, allowing you to combo together stuff that you couldn't normally pull off, but in return, your beast gauge would slowly deplete, and believe me, that's something you want to keep an eye on. You see, once your gauge becomes activated, you may be tempted to just immediately smash that beast button, but if you decide to keep fighting as a human, you can continue to increase your beast gauge until it's double the size. Which is a good idea, because if you take damage in beast form, your gauge will go down, and once it's depleted, if you get hit with a heavy attack, then it will return you to your human form. That means if you just jump into beast mode without thinking about it, you can get hit with 1 or 2 good smacks and instantly lose that advantage. But on the other hand, if you're really low on life, you might need to heal back that health as fast as you can, so you're going to have to risk beast mode even if you don't have the bar to back it up. When I was a kid, I thought the beast mode was just here to be a fun mechanic, just a mindless good monster mash gimmick. But going back and replaying this, I see it's a very effective tool, and there's a lot of strategy to knowing when and how to use it. In fact, that really describes a lot of the combat in here. It's both enjoyably simple and engagingly complex at the same time. Again, playing this decades ago, I just mashed on buttons, and yeah, I could do a few combos out doing that. But watching professionals play it now, people that know what they're doing, it can get wild. This game really knew how to take advantage of that 3D space because the amount of maneuverability this game was capable of was insane back in the day. Like if your opponent is attacking you and you're blocking, but then you step forward at the exact moment that they're attacking, you do a split-second dodge that leaves your opponent wide open to be counterattacked, and that always felt so good to pull off. And speaking of feeling good, this game knew how to give everything an impact. I might not have been able to figure out any big special moves or combos back in the day, but I knew it felt good to just run across the stage and do a kick that sends your opponent flying against the wall, so I spammed that every chance I got. It always felt rewarding. And if you slam your opponents into those walls over and over, then you can actually break those walls with your final attack, which will send them flying out of the ring, and that was always so satisfying. Especially if that final hit was one of your big heavy moves, then the camera would repeat that action 3 times, and that is the secret to making anything feel good. Just show it 3 times. And speaking of making this game look good, I have to point this out, but this was one of the first 3D fighting games to run at 60 frames per second. Yeah, it certainly wasn't the first, but was still rather rare back in the day. In fact, I've mentioned several times that I'm not technologically blessed, I can't emulate games to save my life, but I have heard from several people that Bloody Roar is one of the more demanding PS1 games to run, and a lot of that has to do with the frame rate. Well, then also the fact that you can completely change your character model around mid-match with just the press of a button. Yeah, I feel like I need to stop and make sure that we are all aware of just how big this is. This game, back in 1997, at a time when if Shang Tsung used his morph powers in Mortal Kombat, your PlayStation would freeze and start smoking, allowed you to completely change the model of your character at any time in the middle of a fight, and it didn't slow the game down at all. And I gotta tell you, hitting the beast button and hearing that electric transformation sound mixed with your animal roar as you suddenly just explode into a brand new Savage Fighter without the game being interrupted for even a millisecond, there was nothing like that in fighting games back then. However, I'll admit a lot of the praise I'm sending at this game has been nostalgia, and there is a lot in this game that I ignored as a kid, but now returning to it as an adult, I do think it has some problems. First up, when talking about the game's mechanics, as I said, I love how huge the stages are, and because you can just run across and smash right into your opponent and send them flying, it just feels so good, and that maneuverability is one of the things that I remember so much about this game. But if you miss your opponent as you're swinging at them, or you jump around them at an improper time, then you are stuck with your back to them. Which makes sense, you screw up a move, you leave yourself open. That's just fighting games. But here's the thing. It's not like your back is to them for a second and they have that brief opening to punish you. No, if your back is to an opponent, you have to manually turn yourself around, and that takes way longer than I wanted to. I know it's not going to bug people, but it is an extra step for something that I feel should be automatic. Although I should point out that this game does give each character attacks that hit behind them in case you wind up in that position, so you do have options. But okay, that was admittedly a nitpick. And here comes another one. I don't really care for the blocking in this game. I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. In most fighting games, you block by holding back, or they give you a dedicated block button. Well, Bloody Roar decided it wanted to be different. So in this game, you have 2 kinds of blocking. If you hold back, then you can block anything. Makes sense, that's how blocking works. But if you just don't press anything, just let the controller sit there, then the character will auto-block anything other than low or heavy attacks. Yeah, you can literally just not do anything and the computer will auto-block for you. I admit it is a super minuscule complaint. Most people aren't going to care, and I get that this places more emphasis on counterattacking and reading your opponent's moves. I totally get the appeal of it. But just something about leaving the controller unattended and still watching as your character blocks on their own, it just kind of bugs me. I'll let you on a little behind the scenes secret here. Whenever I'm recording footage for these games, I always have a little time code where I want to make notes about the things that I want to include in this video. And normally whenever a round starts, I hit pause so that way I can write down the notes that I need to take before starting the match. With this game, I literally would just leave the controller there because I knew I would be fine because the computer would just keep punching me and I would just automatically block while I was taking notes. See, it just kind of feels weird to do that, right? And speaking of blocking, this game almost feels like it's designed to give blocking a huge advantage, because there are so many combos in this game. Moves that you can look at the animations for them and just say, yep, that is clearly 100% supposed to be a combo, but they still give the opponent breaks in the middle of this combo animation that lets them just start blocking halfway through it. And considering that you can block by not pressing anything, it means the only way to get some of these combos out is to hope that your opponent never stops pressing buttons. And I have one other complaint, and I think this one might be a little bit controversial. I like these character models. I think for the time that they came out, they were low with personality, and each character is easily identifiable whether they're in beast or human mode. They all have those designs that just pop out at you and make you remember them. But my god, the stages are basic and ugly as sin. They're all just gray, black, or beige settings, and even when there are other colors that pop out, they're typically way in the background past a ring of nothingness and the colors are still muted. And when it comes to how the game sounds, listen, it's got a score that perfectly encapsulates the grungy, rebellious 90s rock that the game is going for. But none of it goes beyond just being fine. It's good, don't get me wrong, it's good, but it's not going to get stuck in your head. However, there is one other bit of presentation that Bloody Roar excels at, and it's an area where so many other games fall short. Unlockables. Normally, when you think of unlockables in your fighting games, you think of things like hidden characters, but not here. No, Bloody Roar had unlockable customizations. Right off the bat, this game gives you unlockables straight out of NBA Jam with the ability to play in chibi mode or big head mode. Can you imagine a modern day fighting game doing something like that? Can you imagine the big epic conclusion to the Tekken Mishima saga, but Jin and Kazuma have giant bobbleheads the entire time? And this game also came out with a full-blown gallery, including peeks at some unused characters, and I always love stuff like this. But after that, every time that you beat the game with a character, you unlock brand new ways to alter the game. You can turn off blocking, remove the walls, control the camera. You basically just get to build the game however you want. This is so brilliant and it gives the game so much replay value. And speaking of beating the game, after you have faced off with all 8 opponents, you then make your way onto the boss. And hey, remember Alice's friend and Mitsuko's daughter Yuriko? Whatever happened to her? Oh, she's been fully brainwashed and turned into Tylon's killing machine. Of course, why wouldn't she be? She transforms into a grown super anime woman, and I remember when I was a kid, I kept looking at this thinking, oh, it's because humans are also a type of animal. That's so smart. But now looking at it as an adult, I realize, oh no, they just wanted to have a super anime woman in here. She's fast and she strikes with electric attacks, but what makes this fight so unique is that when her beast gauge gets depleted, she doesn't turn back into a little kid, no. She transforms into a giant chimera. And I remember the first time that I saw this happen, I was so shocked. I expected when her beast gauge got depleted, she would be weakened for a moment if nothing else. Not that she would transform into a buff demon from Doom. But after you beat her, each character gets their own unique ending. Yugo learns that his father has already been killed by Tylon, so he swears he's going to keep fighting on in his honor. Mitsuko gets her daughter back, and she even adopts Alice to thank her for protecting Yuriko. There's not a lot of huge development in these endings, but that's fine. It was the first chapter of a brand new series. It was still finding its footing. But more importantly, it was finding an audience. This game sold 400,000 copies in America and Europe, which doesn't feel like that big of a number by today's standards, but remember, Hudson wasn't the biggest developer back then. They didn't have massive through-the-roof expectations, and plenty of other fine games released around this time sold similar numbers. So, for these smaller developers, this was considered a success. They made a profit off the game, and more importantly, they made an audience. An audience that was now hooked and eagerly awaiting a sequel. And lucky for them, they wouldn't have to wait that long. Bloody Roar 2 was released in arcades the next year in 1998 and would come to the PlayStation in 1999, and this game right here, this is when Bloody Roar really began for me. You can never really judge a series just from the first installment. Typically it takes 1 or 2 games before they figure out what they want to look and feel like, and the jump from Bloody Roar 1 to 2 is quite noticeable. When it comes to the combat, it's actually pretty similar. All the mechanics of the old game are still here, except for the rave mode. You still got your punch, kick, and beast button, but now your 4th button is a dedicated throw. And combos and special moves still function pretty largely like they did in the last game, except they just feel better. Moves flow together more smoothly, and they feel more rewarding to pull off. I mean, listen, you guys know me. You know that despite the fact that I love fighting games, I'm kind of, trash at them. But if you just look up online some of the big combo videos for this game and you see what it's capable of, this is the kind of stuff that you would expect out of a modern-day anime fighter, not a 3D fighter made back in 1999. It is insane, some of the stuff that can be stringed together. But they do keep some of the stuff that I didn't like from the first game, like having to manually turn your character around and face the opponent, and the auto-block system returns, along with a dedicated guard button that blocks heavy attacks, but the rest of the combat is improved enough to make that stuff more bearable. But as far as new mechanics go, they did give each character supers, or as they're called in this game, beast drives. With these, you can sacrifice your beast gauge, transforming you back into a human, but in return, you do a big super that can deal massive damage to your opponent. And they look great. Very few games back then actually had supers with cinematic camera angles, so this was groundbreaking. Although, speaking of dealing damage, that is one complaint that I have about this game. The damage is immensely higher now. It's not unusual for half your life to just vanish after one combo. Yeah, that felt a bit excessive. The game's director, Kenji Fukuya, said that when making this installment, he wanted it to be a game where, quote, every moment got your heart racing. And hey, you know what? Seeing your entire life bar get completely decimated from one combo and then having to quickly go into beast mode to try and heal it all back, well, that certainly does keep you on your toes. Nothing gets your heart racing like constantly thinking you're going to die. But on average, the game does play better, and it definitely looks better. Don't get me wrong, the last Bloody Roar looked fine for the time it came out, but in just 1 or 2 years, the presentation in this game massively improved. Sure, you still have a few sharp polygon edges here or there, but character bodies actually do have curves now, they're not just a clump of cubes. And the stages? As I said, that was the biggest negative of the last game, but now? Sure, many of the stages still have that stretching void of nothingness around them, but the colors are much better. The textures are much better, and there are far more details in them. It doesn't look like you're fighting in a wasteland anymore. And I have to point out that the character select screen is possibly my favorite character select screen of all time. God damn, you're picking your character from inside of a beast mouth. That is just so damn cool. So, the gameplay was better, the graphics were better, and you know what? It sounded better too. As I said, the music in the last game matched the grungy 90s rock tone that I was going for, but it was kind of generic. Now it's got far more personality to it, and there's a reason for that. The entire musical team from the last game returned except for one new addition. Jun Kajiwara was the new lead guitarist on the team, and if you're wondering who Jun Kajiwara is, well, if you're a fan of this show, then you probably know him best from this. Yeah, Jun Kajiwara was the lead guitarist for KOF 95 through 2000, and if you've ever heard the arranged scores for those games, you know the guitarist is just going off on those tracks, and he definitely brought some of that energy to these tunes. So between the gameplay, the graphics, the sound, everything about this game is so much better. As long as you're playing the PS1 version of the game. Yeah, I should probably bring this up. Bloody Roar 1 and 2 are both available on the PS3 as part of the PS1 Classics collection. And I heard some die-hard Bloody Roar fans say I shouldn't play those versions because they were poor transfers, but I decided to try them out and I played the original Bloody Roar on the PS1 and on the PS3 and it felt exactly the same to me. I'm sure there were some slight hiccups that were so subtle I couldn't detect them, but hey, I'm just playing these games for fun, not to learn the frame data so well that I can become the world's best Bloody Roar 1 player. So after playing Bloody Roar 1 on the PS3, I thought, you guys don't know what you're talking about. The original Bloody Roar works fine on the PS3. So I decided to move over to Bloody Roar 2 on the PS3, and within 2 matches I realized, oh, this is the game everyone was talking about. Yeah, I have no idea how they dropped the ball this hard on this one. Bloody Roar 2 on the PS3 is loaded with so much slowdown, it is flat out unplayable. Normally, I never tell someone, you have to play the game this specific way, and I know the PS1 copies of Bloody Roar 2 are much more expensive than they are in the PS3, but do not play this game on the PS3, it is flat out busted. That's why for the rest of this video, I'll be using the official PS1 version, so let's just take that out of the case and pop it into— Oh god, why would you put that on there? Yeah, as soon as you open the case, you are greeted with some of the brand new shocking characters in this game, of which there are a lot. Which is surprising because back in the 90s, if you had a brand new installment of your fighting game come out so quickly after the last game, normally they kept the roster mostly unchanged and they just focused on updating the gameplay and graphics. But here, out of a starting roster of 9 characters, only 3 of them were playable in the last game. 2/3 of this cast are brand new and created just within a year. Well, kind of. They actually reuse a lot of assets with these brand new characters, as many of them actually use some of the moves from the previous cut characters. But hey, I'm fine with that. I've always said reusing assets is how you get big rosters in your fighting games, and this is a perfect example of that. And to help flesh out these brand new characters, the game didn't just come with an arcade mode, but also a full-blown story mode for every single character, each of which explored why these characters were fighting, and it had fully illustrated panels in between each fight to carry the story along, and I love this! I have said many times that yes, stories are important in your fighting games. People like these characters and they want to know who these characters are and what they're doing and why they're doing it. So stories in your fighting games are important. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need a big cinematic story mode movie. You don't need to spend a ton of time and money on a feature-length story mode that people are just going to play through once. I honestly think most people would be happier if you just gave them a fleshed out and interesting arcade ladder that showed interactions between these characters in between the fights. And this game is a perfect example of that. Giving each character their own unique stories makes you want to keep playing through this until you've seen them all. But what is the story this time around? Well, I've often said that the reason people are invested in fighting game stories and their characters is because fighting game stories are essentially soap operas. You got multiple characters who return for new installments for years and years and years, each with their own stories growing and twisting and weaving with the other characters. So if you follow these games for even a limited amount of time, yeah, you're going to get invested just like you would watching a soap opera. But even by other fighting game standards, Bloody Roar 2 goes full soap opera. It's got evil twins and heroes turning bad and long-lost family members and characters with amnesia. Who would have thought that the game about fighting were-rabbits would have one of the bigger stories of any fighting game of this generation? For starters, it's now been 5 years since the end of the last game. Yeah, most fighting games you have to beg them to finally have the guts to do a time skip. Bloody Roar did in the second game. After the first game, the Tylon Corporation was successfully destroyed, but in the process, the entire world learned about the existence of zoanthropes, and like any time that a new group of people revealed themselves and asked to live in peace, humankind proceeded to freak the hell out and lose their minds. Tensions start rising between humans and zoanthropes, with some humans even hunting down the zoanthropes for sport. And so, the Zoanthrope Liberation Front is formed to protect their were brothers and sisters. Hooray, that's good! Oh wait, it turns out the ZLF is actually a terrorist organization that's killing humans in cold blood, blowing up buildings, and when other Zoanthropes speak out against them, the ZLF kidnap them and brainwash them to become their killer soldiers. Okay, so that's bad. But who are our cast of characters, and how do they all tie into this war between humans and the Brotherhood of Evil Zoanthrope Liberation Front? Well, Yugo returns, having spent the last 5 years as a boxer, and while most of his moves are exactly the same as the last game, you can definitely see some more fancy boxer footwork and some more ducks and bobs and weaves in his animation to match his new fighting style. But 5 years ago, at the end of the last game, as Tylon's base was being destroyed and crumbling down around him, Yugo found a young boy named Kenji in the wreckage who was unable to speak, barely able to move, and had no memories of his past. But Yugo couldn't just leave him there. So Yugo took him home, and slowly Kenji warmed up to Yugo, and the two of them ended up becoming like brothers. Unfortunately for them, the chief mad scientist for the ZLF decides to kidnap Kenji because he wants to awaken his lost memories. Turns out that Kenji was the ninja student of Bakuryu from the last game, who is not returning in this game because, well, remember how he had Tylon inject him with a whole bunch of drugs to try and make him stronger? Well, it turns out that strange concoction of drugs caused him to dissolve into a puddle of goo. Yeah, he ain't going to be walking that off anytime soon. So, this mad scientist brainwashes Kenji to become the new Bakuryu, which is the title of the top ninja of the clan they grew up in, and he ends up becoming a deadly assassin for the ZLF, and as you can imagine, he shares most of his moves with the original Bakuryu. Again, some nice asset reuse right there. But who is this mad scientist? That would be the new fighter, Bushuzima the Chameleon. Yeah, that's right. This guy is the big bad mad scientist of the ZLF. Not exactly the vibe that his design gives off. I don't really see evil scientist out of this, more of guy who smokes weed at the record shop all day. But I think that's on purpose. Even if he's evil and he does some really despicable stuff in the story, he still fights like a total goofball as he wildly flails his arms around. Heck, even in his own story mode, he ends up losing as all the heroes team up and curb stomp him, during which he breaks the fourth wall like Deadpool and says they all came back because they used to continue. So yeah, he's not exactly meant to be a real threat in this game. Although I do have to stress, he is evil. He used to work for Tylon, and working beside him was another scientist, Dr. Steven Goldberg. Dr. Goldberg learned the work that they were doing was actually hurting the zoanthropes, so he decided to turn on Tylon. And like any time that a scientist learns that the work he's doing is for the bad guys and he tries to rebel against them, he is immediately kidnapped and disposed of. Bushuzima experiments on the good doctor until he transforms him into a hideous bug monster, now going by the name Stun the Insect, who still wants to make up for his past mistakes by taking Bushuzima down before his body completely breaks apart. Stun largely acts as this game's grappler with a ton of options, including the ability to grab the opponent with his foot. Damn, let's see Zangief do that! Now, as for some of the other returning characters, Alice returns, having become a nurse in the 5-year time skip. Then Alice's friend and the former boss of the game, Yuriko, comes back, and this time her mother is the one who is kidnapped by the villains, so now she has to go off and rescue her. A nice bit of role reversal from last time. Unfortunately for Yuriko, because of the experiments Tylon performed on her, her zoanthrope gene is permanently damaged, so she can only halfway transform into a beast, making her not a tiny human girl or a giant cat lady. Instead, she's more of a tiny cat girl. Realizing she can't fight like this, she goes off to find Long, who after the last game went to live in isolation as he hated his beast side and wanted to hide it away. Now, this is something I actually really like about this story. Yuriko remembers Long from the first game, and in Yugo and Alice's story, you see that both of them remember each other as well. I dig the idea that these characters didn't just pass each other like ships in the night. No, they actually met each other in the last game, and they remember each other, and they even now have some level of familiarity between themselves. Now there's two more new characters, Ginny the Bat and Sheena the Leopard, and both of them are connected by a third party. Sheena was a young soldier who was adopted by Gado, the French lion fighter from the last game. Now her real name is Jeanne, but she got the nickname Sheena because of what a talented fighter she was. How does that make sense? Because in Japan, her nickname is Marvel, so in the original game, they say that she got her nickname because she was, quote, a marvel on the battlefield. But in English, they changed her name, probably because they were worried about a certain comic book company coming around and asking questions. Which is fine, I like the name Sheena. Except that in the story mode, they still say she got her nickname Sheena because she was a marvel on the battlefield. Guys, come on. Sheena in Japanese means good or virtue. You can still totally make that work with her origin. All you had to do was change the translation. But hey, whether she's called Sheena or Marvel or Jeanne, I still love this character. She's easily my favorite character in the entire series. She's a total badass who fights with headbutts and double leg drops, and she's got Super Saiyan hair. Are you surprised that when I was a kid, I thought she was the coolest? Now, the reason she's tied up in all this is because she's searching for her father, and she's heard rumors that Gado has broken bad and now he's the leader of the ZLF. Which brings us to the final new character, Ginny the Bat, a femme fatale spy who may or may not be taking fashion tips from Felicia from Darkstalkers. Ginny is tied up in all of this because she's investigating these zoanthropes on behalf of her employer, Gado the Lion. So Sheena thinks Gado is the leader of the ZLF, and Ginny is investigating zoanthropes on his behalf. Could Gado really be their leader? Did he actually turn evil from the last game? No, he didn't! But I can't blame anyone for thinking that, because not only is Gado smack dab on the cover of this game, not only is he treated as a big intimidating figure in the intro animation, but he's even the final boss in the arcade mode. So yeah, of course you're going to think he's the leader of the ZLF. But when you play through the story mode, you find out that he's actually trying to bring the ZLF down. So why is he the final boss? Well, if you're playing as one of the villains, then he's trying to stop you. That makes sense. But if you're playing as one of the heroes, he says that humans and zoanthropes need someone to unite them, and he's too old for the gig. So he wants to test your strength to see if you can be the leader that this new era needs. That's certainly an acceptable reason for him to fight you, at least by fighting game logic. But doesn't that also mean that this final boss fight has the smallest stakes ever for an arcade ladder? I mean, who cares if you lose to him now? If you make it to Gato, that means the ZLF has already been defeated. Win or lose against Gato, everybody still gets to go home just fine because the bad guys have been taken out. It kind of almost feels like this should have been a secret boss fight instead. You take down the leader of the ZLF, and if you do it with a super move or within a certain amount of time, then Gato now pops up and says he wants to test your might. That would make way more sense to me. Although, speaking of secret boss fights, after you beat arcade mode, you do unlock Gato as a playable character, but he isn't the only unlockable. Yeah, by now you're probably thinking, wait, if Gato isn't the leader of the ZLF, then who is? Well, secretly behind the scenes, Bushuzima is running everything, but because this is not a face that screams, "Follow me into battle," the one who is running things up front is the brand new character, Shenlong. Although I say brand new character in quotation marks. You see, back when Long was working as an assassin for Tylon, old Bushuzima got a sample of his DNA and then created a clone who would be loyal to him. And that was Shenlong. And like many evil clones, he's the total dark reflection of the original. I mentioned that Long hates his B-side and wants to fight against it. Well, Shenlong basically is what Long would become if he rejected his humanity instead and embraced his savage beastly nature. But like with any Frankenstein story, Shenlong does eventually learn his true origin and ends up having something of a psychotic breakdown and turning on his master. Now, how do you unlock Shenlong? Well, you have to make it through the entire arcade ladder without losing a match, then you get a secret fight against Shenlong himself, and you have to beat him, but you only get one shot at it. And this secret one-shot only boss fight would become a tradition for this series moving forward, and while Shen is certainly tough, the game is nice enough to let you cheat a bit. You can still hit the requirements to face him even after messing around the options menu, meaning that you can set the difficulty to the lowest, turn the matches to one round only, and double your attack damage, so even if you do lose to him, it'll only take you about 5 minutes to get back to him and try again. And that was Bloody Roar 2. As I said, that was the game that really helped this series find its footing, not only tweaking the combat into a more stable state, but it was also the game that more firmly established the cast, the tone, and the art style. And audiences responded positively to this, as it sold nearly 500,000 copies in North America and Europe, which was a big bump from the first game, meaning all this extra work had paid off. In fact, that same year, Soul Calibur came out for the Dreamcast and sold almost the exact same numbers in the West, meaning Bloody Roar wasn't just succeeding, it was competing with other big names now. This game now had a growing fan base and it had passionate developers working behind the scenes. But was that going to be enough to carry this series into the next generation? Bloody Roar 3 was released in Japanese arcades in December of 2000 and would be released on the PS2 the next year. Now, I'm gonna be straight with you guys. So far, I've been talking about these games from a very personal stance, talking about how I remember them and how much I loved these games when I was a kid. But this is the one Bloody Roar I never got to touch before doing this retrospective. I played it once for a charity stream a year ago, and that was it. Don't get me wrong, I really wanted to play it back in the day. This was one of my most anticipated titles when it was released, but this was around the time that I was flat broke. I had no money for new games. And every time that I went to Hollywood Video to try and rent it back in the day, I always saw its empty case sitting there on the rack, just mocking me. I don't know who in my old neighborhood kept this thing checked out 24/7, 365, but they wanted to make sure that no one else in my hometown got to play it. I bring this up because it means going into this game, I didn't have any nostalgia backing me up. Instead, it was quite the opposite. Throughout the years, I heard this game wasn't as well received as the last one. I read some positive reviews, but just as many negative ones, making me think that this game was pretty divisive. Well, now that I've finally gotten my hands on, and now that I've finally gotten to dive deep into the game and experience it for the first time... Yeah, it's okay. Let's start with the presentation. You can see that the graphics definitely took a huge bump up thanks to the PS2 hardware, and nowhere is that more clear than in the stages. In the last game, I thought the stages were better, but now they're actually good. They each have personalities. They actually look like you're at a location rather than just existing in some void with a landmark in the background. A lot of them have a very urban city vibe to them, which matches the rock rebel tone of the series, and there's far more variety to them. Some stages are small, some are huge. There's one that's just a long row of gates that you have to knock down in order to extend your battlefield. Sure, they still have walls up to cage you in, but that's just the theme of the game. Knocking your opponent into them and sending them flying out with your final blow is part of the fun. However, what isn't part of the fun is that thanks to the new camera angle, you'll often get the walls semi-transparent in the foreground, and God do I hate this! It wasn't that big of a problem the first time that I played through this game, but the more I went through that arcade ladder, the more it irritated me. At best, it makes the game look uglier, and at worst, it can actually be distracting during a fight. But I don't think that's why the game got worse reviews. No, that comes down to two things. One is the modes. Yeah, in the last game you had the arcade mode, but you also had a story mode with a unique path for every single character full of unique illustrations. Not here. Now you just have arcade mode with some intro artwork and ending artwork, and that's about it. Not bad for most fighting games, but compared to the story mode of the last game, yeah, you're going to be disappointed. And in the previous games, you had all kinds of bonuses like Chibi mode or Big Head mode or all kinds of other different ways to play. In Bloody Roar 3, you have... nothing! Yeah, if you want bonuses, you can go into the gallery, which is just the intro and ending artwork that you've already seen. Again, that's fine for other fighting games, but when you give us 2 games with cool bonus modes and then you take them away, it's going to hurt. Although the original Japanese release of the game did have a debug mode that let you freely manipulate the models in the game, so that was kinda neat. Except that the debug mode wasn't in there on purpose, they just forgot to take it out before the game was released, and this was when the internet was starting to become a big deal, and yes, this did lead to people uploading pervy 3D model art of Bloody Roar characters on fan sites. So yeah, shockingly this mode was patched out of the international releases. But the other thing that I think led to these mediocre reviews was the gameplay. Now, I mentioned that the camera angle is different, and that results in a slight change to the gameplay as well. Fukuya said that going into this third game, they wanted to appeal to a wider audience and make it more accessible. And I can totally see that in the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, throwing out the punches and kicks still feel the same. In fact, I'm sure some of the hardcore Bloody Roar fans will disagree with me on this, but I actually think it even feels a little better than in Bloody Roar 2. I found I could now combo moves together that I couldn't pull off in the previous game, so yeah, I think it feels pretty good. Then again, I am the casual trash player that Fukuya was trying to aim this game at, so what do I know? But Bloody Roar was known for having tons of mobility. It almost felt like an arena fighter at times. But now, yeah, this feels like a full-blown 3D fighter. Don't get me wrong, it's still got a ton in common with Bloody Roar 2. Your hits still feel the same, it's still got that blocking mechanic from Bloody Roar 2, and you can still jump and run all over the stage. Those full-screen charging flying kicks are still there, don't you worry. But with the camera zoomed in closer, your characters feel more tethered together, like the importance is more on close-range combat rather than what you can do within the arena. And the sidestep dodge from the previous games is gone, and instead you now have a fast evade, where if you hit guard at the last second, then you bob and weave around the attack. Which again, puts more focus on keeping yourself close to your opponent, but it keeps you feeling kinetic. I do understand why people would miss the higher mobility of the previous games, but I do think that this game still has a ton of flexibility to it. I also have to point out that I think the problems with the back being turned to your opponent is massively improved upon. You can still end up with your back to your opponent, especially because now it feels like almost every single character has a dedicated turn your back to the enemy move, and yes, that is irritating. But you can now turn your back around much quicker, and boy do I appreciate that! Now when I get my back to the opponent, it doesn't feel like he's just going to bully me and keep me down. No, now it feels like I screwed up, I left myself open to be punished, but if they don't take advantage of that quickly, then I do have the opportunity to recover. Also, speaking of getting punished, have to point this one out, the damage, much better. It no longer feels like one combo is sending you straight to the hospital. This damage is much more manageable. So while I can understand some people preferring Bloody Roar 2's gameplay, I think the combat does flow better here and it does fix some problems I had. So why do I think the combat led to negative reviews? Because aside from the speed and the emphasis on closer combat, this still feels a lot like the previous games. And this was at a time when a lot of fighting games were dying off, and many of the series that were surviving were trying to feel new. And while Bloody Roar 3 did make some changes, they were fairly subtle. To the casual fans, this was still just Bloody Roar. And if I can be honest with you, listen, I still love the whole beast mode, I think it's a great mechanic, I think it's fun in the older games, I think it's fun in this game. But I feel like a lot of critics were starting to fall out of love with it, and they were just saying, you can turn into an animal, that's great, what else can you do? Yeah, I think the honeymoon stage was just over for a bunch of critics, and while I didn't read all the negative reviews, most of the ones I did read called the combat way too simplistic and mindless. And again, I know the hardcore Bloody Roar fans who know each character's frame data will disagree with me on this, but for the people who didn't want to learn all the crazy combos, yeah, this still felt like the combat from a PS1 game. Now, okay, I realize I'm making it sound like the game doesn't add anything new, but there are a couple of additions that are worth mentioning. Each character now has 2 beast drives, but you can also go into something called the Hyper Beast form. While in this form, you'll have a limited amount of time where you'll deal more damage, heal more quickly, the timer freezes, moves can now combo together that couldn't combo before, and you can perform as many beast drives as you want without reverting to being a human. This is the ultimate power-up. It is everything that you could want. Everything is stronger. You feel unstoppable, but man does it come with a huge downside. After you come out of Hyper Beast form, your beast gauge is gone. Not for the round, for the entire match. You pull this out in round 2, you better hope you don't go to round 3. It is a massive gamble, but hey, risk and reward is what fighting games are all about, and it does raise the tension when your life is low and you know this could be the only thing that saves you. But what is the Hyper Beast form? Why are our amazing animal fighters getting this power-up? Well, to learn that, we have to turn to the story. For the first time in the series, we're taking a break from the tension between humans and Zoanthropes. Okay, Beastmen! I guess we're calling them Beastmen now. Yeah, in North America, this game was being distributed by Activision, so I'm guessing they just didn't have a translator who paid attention to the last game because the phrase Zoanthrope is nowhere to be found in this game. But yes, after the last game, Gato convinced Yuko that he has to act as the link between humans and Zoanthropes. So he heads up a new organization called WOC, World of Coexistence. And suddenly, Zoanthropes find a strange mark appearing on their bodies that grant them this incredible power. This is known as the Sign of the Beast, or in Japanese, the X genome code. Oh, come on! You guys are literally calling it the X gene now? You are making it really hard not to compare you to the X-Men. Now I know why you had to change Marvel's name. These beast signs are coming from a mysterious artifact known as the Tabula of 1,000 Beasts. This tablet has a dark evil entity called the Unborn sealed inside, but its powers are seeping out and causing these beast signs to appear. So the Unborn possesses one of these Zoanthropes, a man known as Zion, who becomes obsessed with killing all the other Zoanthropes, including his own sister, so that way he won't have to share this power, and he can then open the tablet and let the Unborn free to destroy all life. Now Zion doesn't turn into an animal. Instead, he turns into the avatar for the Unborn itself, meaning he turns into this big, pale Super Sentai insect creature. And since he doesn't turn into an animal, a lot of Bloody Roar fans are kinda torn on Zion, and so am I. Because I get you want your big villain to be something special, so just making them another regular animal might not be big enough. But there's a lot that you can turn your villain into that keeps the animal theme going and still make them special. Heck, if you want something that feels really threatening, then just choose a mythical animal or a dinosaur, something huge and intimidating that feels out of this world but still connects to animals. Oh well. In the end, it's just this one villain, so I guess it's okay. Good thing there isn't another unborn ripoff character coming into the next game. So yeah, that's basically the plot. Zion wants to kill the zoanthropes to open this tablet. Everyone is racing to stop him. The end. As you can tell, even cutting it slack for not having a story mode, the story of Bloody Roar 3 is pretty light. Most character arcade endings are nothing more than good thing we beat Zion anyway, back to our normal lives. Zion is really the only character in here who matters. Heck, as I said, I never got to play this game when it first came out, but they were pushing Zion so much that I actually thought he was the new protagonist for a while. And there's a reason they're pushing him so hard. He's the only new character in the base roster, which might be another reason why people found this game disappointing. Bloody Roar 2 introduced so many brand new characters, but you turn this game on and it's literally just the exact roster of Bloody Roar 2, plus a Dante from Devil May Cry wannabe. Wait a second. When did I say this game came out? And when did the first Devil May Cry come out? Well, I'll be damned. Take that, everyone who's been spamming the "that's just Dante" joke in the comments. And Zion isn't just the only new character in the game, he is also the big boss of the game, and holy crap do I hate this fight. He's fast, his combos go on forever, he can jump around you to easily mix you up at speed so fast I just wrote Zion's jumping BS in my timecode notes. He's got huge range in his beast form, he loves to sidestep and dodge your attacks, and the ones he doesn't dodge, he blocks. Dear God, does he love to block. He will block everything if he can. Have I mentioned I hate how much this franchise loves to block? Like I said, I read a lot of the reviews for this game, and most of the complaints were from the gameplay, including how you can really only get out a few hits before the game just starts auto-blocking everything. And again, yes, I know that all the die-hard competitive Bloody Roar fans out there know all the combos of how to get around that. But speaking as someone who just enjoys fighting games from a more casual standpoint, after playing through this arcade mode a few times, I went from disliking the auto-block system to flat out loathing it. Now, as I said, Zion is the only new character of the starting roster, but there are two unlockables, both of whom harken back to the very first game. There's Koryu, the Iron Mole. You remember Bakoryu from the very first Bloody Roar? Remember how when he died he dissolved into a pile of goo? Well, apparently some of the remaining scientists from Tylon scooped him up and put him into a robot, reviving him as a mecha mole. And the final unlockable character is Uranus. She's a floating woman with insane speed and strength and electric attacks, and she has the power to transform into a chimera, and if any of that sounds familiar, it's because she's literally just Yuriko from the very first game. Yeah, apparently they figured that the boss from the very first game should be playable, but we already got Yuriko just sitting over there as a half-beast, so we can't really use her. So let's just create a brand new character with a UR name and nobody will know the difference. However, if you're looking for any story behind her, yeah, there really isn't any. She doesn't even have an arcade ending. In the next game, we do learn that Tylon made her after they couldn't control Yuriko, but again, that's kind of all we know. Was she another kidnapped zoanthrope? Is she a clone of Yuriko? We have no idea. But I do dig her design, and she is fun to play as, although if you want to unlock her, then not only do you have to get through the arcade ladder without losing a single match, but just like Shenlong in the last game, you then have to fight her, and you only get one shot to beat him. You lose, that's it. Try again from the start. So how was Bloody Roar 3 received? As I said, the sales on Bloody Roar 2 were up from the sales of the first game, and considering that the PS2 cost more to make games on than the PS1, we can only hope that those sales increased. They did not. This game only sold 350,000 copies worldwide, meaning this game sold less worldwide than the previous game sold in just North America. So the next game would have to turn things around, and hopefully a change in consoles could help with that. We now come to not just the 4th game in the Bloody Roar series, but the 5th as well. Well, okay, it's more like the 4th than 4th and a half. 4th and a quarter. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So, right after Bloody Roar 3 was released, Fukuya decided that they wanted to make essentially a side story for Bloody Roar. I mean, this decision was probably made after seeing the increased sales of Bloody Roar 2 and before seeing the decreased sales of Bloody Roar 3. They wanted to bring this series to a brand new console, and they decided on the GameCube because despite its low sales, it did have the better horsepower and some more advanced lighting abilities. And they took advantage of this new power because this is easily the best looking Bloody Roar game. Heck, I still think this looks pretty good by today's standards. This game has the exact same roster from Bloody Roar 3, but each of these characters received massive redesigns to try and make them look more modernized, and in the case of Alice, about 80% less anime. This is why Yugo no longer looks like a 90s grunge rocker and instead looks like an early 2000s skateboarder. I'm sure some of you have been laughing at these characters' outfits throughout this video, but hey, what can I say? I dig them. These designs just scream Bloody Roar to me. Or Hot Topic. Either way, my inner teenager is happy. Now, I mentioned that this is a side story, and that's because the plot this time is disconnected from the main story. I don't mean it's not canon, no, just that it's meant to stand on its own. Which is really weird because the plot this time is that with the rising tension between humans and zoanthropes, a new Hey! We're going by zoanthropes again! Alright. Good sign, everybody. With the rising tension between humans and zoanthropes, a new zoanthrope nation is formed to try and build peace between everyone. Which is very important because it means that for once Bloody Roar actually beat the X-Men to a plotline. Dang, this game really is turning things around. Now, this new nation does want to bring peace to humans and zoanthropes, but considering they have a whole army of zoanthrope soldiers and they largely get funded through a series of zoanthrope mercenaries, humans are kinda nervous about all this. Not to mention, rumors are beginning to spread about experiments being conducted on zoanthropes to try and learn about the origin of their powers, and everyone wants to know who is behind that. Well, in order to help build trust with the humans and to celebrate the founding of this new nation, the leader of the Zoanthrope Kingdom, King Orion, hosts the first ever Zoanthrope fighting tournament. Now, I said it's very odd to me that this is a spin-off story, and I say that because, sure, this is the only game that involves a tournament, and it is in a brand new kingdom far away from the urban setting of the rest of the series. So in a way, it does have that anime tie-in movie that will never be referenced in the main series kind of vibe to it. But outside of that, just think about the plot of the first two Bloody Roar games. Now think about the fact that this game is all about tensions between zoanthropes and humans and zoanthropes being kidnapped to be experimented upon, and it's a side story, and the official third installment of the franchise is the one that's all about a tablet with a demon inside granting our heroes special one-time power-ups, and the big boss is the only non-animal in the franchise. Doesn't it feel like those two got mixed up? Now, as I said, every character from Bloody Roar 3 was here, including Uranus and Koryu, but there were two new characters. Ganesha the Elephant, a powerful grappler and the bodyguard of the Prince of the Zoanthrope Kingdom, and the Prince himself, Kronos, who also acts as the game's final boss. Now, I really like Kronos. He's got a good design, he's fun to play, and you can tell in the story that he's actually a very complex character because despite wanting this new nation to succeed so that it can help zoanthropes, he's very torn about the experiments that his father is conducting. Oh, yeah, right. Should have mentioned that. The guy leading this new nation is also the one conducting all the evil experiments on zoanthropes. Who could have possibly seen that coming? But what makes Kronos stand out and be really unique are his beast forms. That's right, forms. Because Hyper Beast form returns from the last game, but it operates very differently this time around. Previously, you could only use it once and then your beast gauge was gone, and you could only activate it when that beast gauge was completely charged to max. Now, you can activate it at any time, and I mean any time. And once you've activated it, you don't lose your beast gauge. But the downside is that not only does it drain your beast gauge while you're in this form, but if you don't have full beast gauge when you activate it, you lose a chunk of your life. Which sounds like a fair trade, until you remember that while you're in this form, you can do as many beast drives as you want, and one thing that I haven't mentioned so far is that when you do a beast drive, it instantly heals back all the damage that you recently took. So, just activate Hyper Beast, have it take a chunk of your life, but then instantly use Beast Drive, and even if you whiff it, you're still going to gain all that life back, and you'll still have plenty of Hyper Beast time left. So yeah, it's not all that well thought out, but honestly, it's still really fun using Hyper Beast this time around, so I don't care. Be as broken as you want, Bloody Roar, I'm down with it. Now, the reason I mentioned this change is because when Kronos goes into his beast mode, he turns into a penguin. Yeah, the big final boss of this game turns into a penguin. In April 2001, the official Bloody Roar website launched a poll asking players what animals they would like to see, and penguin, as you can guess, came in fourth. Yeah, it wasn't even number one. However, a lot of people theorize that because it's still ranked fairly high, that's why Kronos had this form. Which does sound possible, although it's also possible they gave him this form because it means his hitbox is atrocious. This is the hitbox that you would give to a gag character, not the final boss. However, if he activates Hyper Beast form, then Kronos goes into his second form, a phoenix. And this form? Yeah, this ain't no gag character. You see this thing coming, all you can do is try and survive until his beast gauge is gone. And if you're wondering why Kronos has two forms, considering that Kronos' dad is doing experiments to try and find the origin of zoanthropes, and he says these experiments will bring humans and zoanthropes together, if I had to take a guess, I'd say King Orion is trying to find a way to force zoanthrope transformation onto people, basically turning the entire world into zoanthropes, and he experimented on his son, and the end result was his son having two transformations. That is entirely just my theory, but this franchise leaves massive holes in the story everywhere, so if you want to make it through, then you're going to have to fill in the blanks. Now, there was one more secret character in this game, but before we get to that, I need to explain why I said this was sort of a game and a half. This game was released in North America in March of 2002 as Primal Fury for the GameCube. But in April, 1 month later, it was released in Japan under the name Bloody Roar Extreme. And in that version, it included a brand new character. Kind of. This is Fang the Wolf, a character who originated in the manga Bloody Roar the Fang. He's a journalist who is investigating zoanthropes and mysterious occult-like events, and he just happens to look a lot like Yugo, and because of that, he is essentially an echo fighter for him in this game. And because of this, a lot of people think that Fang is meant to be like an evil twin to Yugo, or a doppelganger of some kind, which is understandable. I mean, look at his wolf design, he literally has devil wings. But no, that's just a misunderstanding. He's actually a good dude, he just happens to look like our hero, and fighting games have taught you if someone looks like our hero, he's either their rival or he is a villain. Now, what makes this even more confusing is that Fang was only in the Japanese version of Primal Fury, which as I said, was called Bloody Roar Extreme. Well, the next year in March, this game was ported to the Xbox under the name Bloody Roar Extreme, and that version did include Fang for Western audiences to now play, and it also had several small updates to the gameplay, the most noticeably relating to the sidestep dodges. But again, just speaking to you guys from the casual perspective, it's nothing that anyone outside the more competitive die-hard Bloody Roar fans are going to notice. In fact, the biggest change to me is that the Xbox version completely remade the anime cutscenes with CGI, and when I say they remade them, I mean they just flat out remade them. The opening cutscene and the character endings are exactly the same, just in CGI. And when it comes to the endings, hey, I get it, that's story stuff. You don't want to change story stuff. But why just copy the opening cutscene? If you're going to try and make this feel like a different game and you're remaking the opening anyways, just make a new opening to help this game stand out. At this point, you should just save yourself some money and just keep the anime cutscenes in. Which you totally should have done anyways. These anime cutscenes are full of life and personality and they actually look pretty good. Meanwhile, the CGI scenes feel dated and are loaded with awkward faces. Yuriko, what are you doing? What is that expression? So, just to recap, this game came out in North America under the title Bloody Roar Primal Fury. Then, a month later, it was released in Japan with a new character going under the name Bloody Roar Extreme. Then a year later, North America got Bloody Roar Extreme on the Xbox with the brand new character, but with different gameplay, meaning technically there are 3 different versions of this same one game. Now, anytime that I do a retrospective, someone always asks me, so if I can only pick up one of these games, which one is the best? And rarely do I ever have an answer to that. What is best is very dependent on your own personal taste. But when it comes to Bloody Roar, Primal Fury and Extreme, those are the best. It's not even close for me. And it's not just because they look better or sound better, although I do have to mention that each of these games did have voice acting, and so far they've been
Lucky it wasn't a full moon tonight. Lucky it wasn't a full moon. You're lucky there's no full moon.
Whatever that was. But Primal Fury was given a full cast of high-profile voice actors, and you can totally feel that. The voice acting isn't good just because the other games sucked, it's good because it's actually good. Something that was still very rare to say about a fighting game in 2002. But the most important thing is that the combat, while still feeling similar to the last game, was vastly improved in some key ways. All the basic ideas and rules of Bloody Roar 3 are still here, but the buttons feel like they actually advance. The combos are mostly the same from the last game, but the speed is slightly increased, making it more in line with the quicker combat of the earlier games. And I know I said earlier that some critics accuse this combat of being mindless, but in reality there was a whole deeper layer to this gameplay. You see, you could pull off many moves and combos by pressing 2 buttons at the same time, or at least very closely together. And hey, that's fine. I mean, heck, half the combos in Tekken require you to hit multiple buttons. But Bloody Roar isn't Tekken. It doesn't feel like Tekken. It doesn't flow like Tekken. It has its own pacing and speed to it. And because of that, not only did I always think inputting these more complex buttons felt clunkier, it just felt less natural with the rest of the combat. Well, Primal Fury shifts all that around. Now you can do far more with just 1 button at a time. And thanks to the new pace of the game, those buttons just flow together so much smoother. They feel more natural to string together. I mean, listen, I'm just running out of ways to say this game just feels really good. This is hands down the best combat in the franchise. And I have to point this out, the auto-blocking? Again, I know that the more dedicated players knew how to work around this before, but just speaking personally, it is so much easier to adapt to that now. That's because the combat isn't just quicker, but it's also more responsive. So when you see someone blocking, you can quickly adapt to that. You can start building something new around it. And the critics seem to feel the same way, because no matter how you felt about the combat of the previous games or how good it might have been, I mentioned that a lot of critics still basically looked at this series as that game where you turn into Beast and nothing else. Most critics didn't pay attention to the combat. But this was the most positively reviewed Bloody Roar, and a lot of that had to do with the combat. More people were paying attention to that now. Which could be why this game still sees the most tournament play to this day out of the entire series. And most shockingly of all, the big cherry on top? This game brings back all the crazy unlockable modes of the first 2 games. Chibi mode, big head mode, big arm mode, it's all back and it's delightfully nutty in the best way. Bloody Roar might have stumbled with 3, but this game was bringing it all back. Only for them to immediately lose it all again.
What did you do to Nagi?
So, as I said, Bloody Roar 3 saw a fairly sizable drop in sales, and Primal Fury and Extreme, despite being the most positively reviewed games in the series, sold about the same. So things were not looking good for this franchise. And speaking of not looking good, yeah, it was around this time that Konami was absorbing Hudson, meaning that Konami would be co-producing this upcoming game. And I know, these days you hear Konami and you think of the past half decade of them just being the worst, but this was 2003 Konami. This was Konami back when they still cared. But that doesn't mean they still didn't screw this game over. For starters, while Rising and Hudson were still making the game together, Konami stuck their nose in and said they didn't want to use Rising's engine, the engine that they had been using on every other Bloody Roar game, the engine made specifically for fighting games. Instead, they wanted them to use the renderware engine, which, to Konami's cred, seemed like a smart idea at the time. I mean, this was the engine that breakout hits like Grand Theft Auto 3, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, the second worst Simpsons game, and Suikoden 3 were made on. And it's the engine that Mortal Kombat used for Deadly Alliance. So I can totally understand a Konami executive coming to Hudson and Rising and saying, hey, this engine is making some of the hottest games right now, and it even helped Mortal Kombat move into the 3D world, so let's use that. And considering that this was the first time in this franchise that Bloody Roar was going to get an M rating and the blood effects were not only returning, but they were now extra goopy, yeah, I definitely think it's fair to say that they were chasing that Mortal Kombat money. But hey, Mortal Kombat was popular, and this engine was popular, so nothing wrong here. Until you realize this game was going to be coming out only 1 year after Primal Fury and only a couple months after Extreme. Meaning this game, that had used the exact same engine for years, now had only 1 year to make a fully functioning fighting game from scratch on an engine they didn't recognize. And with that as its starting line, Bloody Roar 4 feels exactly like you would expect it to. This game feels like an IKEA shelf that had to be put together without all the parts, and now a strong breeze will knock it over. For starters, the game looks much worse. All the returning characters use their Primal Fury designs and largely use the same animations, but they don't look nearly as polished because, as I have pointed out time and time again on this show, you can't just drag and drop old models into a brand new engine and expect it to work out. You need time to clean that up. But time was something that this game didn't have. Although unlike Primal Fury, which borrowed most of its stages from Bloody Roar 3, this game used completely new stages. And god do they suck! This game wanted to go back to the more urban settings of the previous games, which hey, that was part of the game's identity. I'm fine with that. But the stages are now also gray and muddy. They all have the exact same color pattern. You went from stages that had so much personality and variety to them to arguably the worst stages in the entire series. And they got rid of the cages and instead replaced them with clear glass walls, and you can still break through these walls, but if you do that, you end up flying onto another part of the stage, which, hey, I'll admit is actually a cool idea. But because you are now essentially fighting on two halves of a stage, that means that on the breakable stages, and even oddly enough on some of the stages that aren't breakable, it means that the starting stage is so tiny. The stages in this franchise were known for being open, so that way you had tons of maneuverability inside them, but now it felt like you were fighting inside of a walk-in closet. I've had studio apartments that were larger than these stages. So, okay, the game doesn't look all that great, but how does it sound? As I said, the voice acting got better with each installment, and Primal Fury, yeah, it was actually good. They finally nailed it. So, of course, this game decided to throw most of that cast away. Now, I doubt this was a contract issue because many of those actors from Primal Fury worked on Konami on other games. More than likely, it was a money issue because the new cast is,
well, I'm not very good at talking.
Boy, you can say that again. It sounds like nobody in this cast knew how to speak English. Or like they were being directed by someone who didn't. Yes, unlike Primal Fury, which had a special English voice director, the director of Bloody Roar 4 was the same director for the Japanese cast. And this was at a time when a lot of games wouldn't hire voice directors that spoke English fluently for the international releases, meaning even if they could understand the language, they didn't exactly know what words in the sense to put emphasis on or the timing of the delivery, you know, things that are important when directing actors. There were a lot of games at this time that were plagued by having directors who didn't understand English. And the voice cast on this game worked on all of them. Yeah, do yourselves a favor, just take a day and go through the resume of all the actors in this game. It is all the hits of the late 90s, early 2000s bad voice acting. You'll find games like Shenmue, Silent Hill, the Mega Man X and ZX games, Michigan Road to Hell, a classic, can't leave out Michigan Road to Hell, and of course, the king of bad voice directors who didn't understand the language they were directing.
Whoa! What is it?
What? Oh! Oh no! Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
You must be from the Bravo team.
Yes, I'm Rebecca Chambers. I'm a newcomer. I just joined the Stars Bravo team last month.
Yeah, it was a little scary, but I think it's been useful, so it's okay.
And again, I want to stress this, I am not blaming the actors here. It's clear this was the voice director's fault, because many of these actors went on to give good performances in other games. Heck, some of them were even the actors in Primal Fury, but their performances here are noticeably worse, giving us moments like this.
I changed form that time you tried to kill me!
This.
I guess the only thing I regret is that I can't keep Puckball.
This.
I've got something I want to ask you. Will you answer me? Yeah? I feel something from you.
And of course, moments like this.
How could I lose to someone like you? I'll be back, and I'll get...
Yeah, I don't even know how you screw that one up. Actually, I do. Crunch production time, that's how. Yeah, this thing was so rushed, you can see it breaking apart at every single corner, and nowhere is that more clear than in the combat. Now, I already mentioned how cramped many of the stages are, and that would be bad enough on its own. But to really emphasize that problem, your mobility is through the roof. And hey, I enjoy fighting games that feel like they give you lots of freedom, but this game is way too loose. I mentioned that the previous games received some negative reviews from critics for having, quote, mindless combat. But if you stop and look into it and you actually try and learn it, you'll see there is a lot of variety to what these games can do. This game, however, is mindless. This is the most button-mashy button masher ever. You can just slam your palm into buttons and stuff will happen. And this game does still have light and heavy blocking, but you remember how in the first game if you pressed forward as the enemy was attacking then you would sidestep it? Well, they decided to bring that back in this game. As well as the fast evade from Bloody Roar 3. And a new dodge mechanic where if you hold down guard and an attack, then you take a stance where you dodge everything but grabs and you'll counterattack when you release the guard. So there's 3 different types of evades now? Yes, but also no. Each character only has one of these types of evades. And I don't mean you get to decide which one you want to use like some kind of a groove system. No, the developers decided to assign a specific dodge to a specific character, which is certainly a bold idea. But man, this just screams to me that these devs were being told by Konami, make it better, make it more interesting, get those sales up, do something different in this game. So the devs were just throwing everything at the wall that they could think of. Let's just bring back everything that we've ever done in the previous games and we'll figure out how to balance it later. If there's time. But that isn't the worst thing about this combat. Oh no. That's the changes to the beast gauge. Dear God, what did they do to the beast gauge? In previous games, the gauge would go up as you attacked or as you got hit, and you would have to wait until the first bar was filled up before you could transform. Now, the second you have even a pixel of beast gauge, you can transform into your beast mode. Okay, makes it seem a little bit less special, but that's not too bad. Here's where it becomes too bad. When you're in beast mode, you do not lose life. Instead, you lose your beast gauge. So basically, if you take a hit in human form, you gain beast gauge. Then you can instantly transform into your beast form. Then in beast form, you won't take damage to your life bar. Instead, you'll just lose your beast gauge, turning you back into a human, only to immediately turn back into a beast as soon as you get hit. They tried to balance this out by making it so that any damage you take is huge. One combo can almost clear out your life bar if you're in human mode, and then when your life bar is depleted, you are then forced to go into beast mode until all of your beast gauge is gone, and that's how you lose the game. But I'm sorry, there was no balancing this idea, it's just stupid. For starters, I already mentioned how crazy it is to just go back and forth between beast and human that fast, and believe me, it looks ridiculous too. The flash effect from someone transforming to instantly being knocked out of that to instantly transforming back can fill the screen with so much light that you can barely make out what's happening at times. But it also makes the combat so tedious. To defeat the opponent, you have to wipe out their health bar. Then they transform into their beast mode, and then you have to wipe out their beast gauge. Which means if the enemy transforms into beast mode and they have full beast gauge, you basically have to beat an entire life bar out of them before they change back to human, and then you can actually do damage to them that matters. But oh, wait, you got 2 hits in on them, and now their beast gauge is halfway full again, and they've transformed back into beast mode, and once again, you then have to fight them in that mode, not doing any actual damage to their life bar. Because of this, I can't tell you how many matches I saw that ended in time over because, yeah, your characters just aren't doing actual damage to each other for most of the match. What do you think was going to happen? In fact, I'm not making this up. There's a mechanic in the game where if you press the beast button and hold it down, then you sacrifice your life in order to charge up your beast gauge, and anytime I saw the computer doing that, I was always tempted to just let them go because, sure, it was giving them beast gauge, but they were at least losing life. And damn, this game is so frustrating at times, I was tempted to see if they would be dumb enough to KO themselves. Oh, and I mentioned how many fights end in time over, so let me ask you something. If you're in a match, and it goes to time over, and you still have your human health, but your opponent has lost all their human health, and they only have their beast gauge left, then you'd be the winner, right? I mean, clearly you've done more damage to them at this point if they've lost all their human health, so that means that you win, right? Not necessarily, because when determining the winner in a time over, the game adds up your remaining human health and your remaining beast gauge. I bring this up because, hey, remember how when you take damage, your beast gauge goes up? And you know how when you use a beast drive, you deplete your own beast gauge? Yeah, think about that for just a second, because I'm going to go ahead and warn you. If time is ticking down, and you're afraid that it's going to go into time over, so you think to yourself, oh man, I gotta beat my opponent now, do not use your beast drive. Because if you use your beast drive, and you deplete your enemy's regular health, what you're actually doing is increasing their beast gauge with the damage you do to them, while depleting your own beast gauge. I am going to repeat that, because I don't believe it's possible to understand how stupid it is after hearing it only once. Because of the way that the beast gauge works in this game, combined with how time over figures out your health total, your supers effectively sacrifice your life in order to give it to your opponent. Again, I don't know how much this game was crunched, but this just screams, we didn't have time to test anything, we just had to ship it. Oh, and speaking of the beast drives, let's talk about how they're broken too. In previous games, if you did your beast drive, then it would instantly deplete your beast gauge and turn you back into a human. Well now, if you do your beast drive, it does turn you back into a human, but it only takes part of your beast gauge. Meaning, if you got full beast gauge, then you can go into beast mode, do a beast drive, change right back into a beast, do another beast drive, and still have enough meter left over that you can go back into beast mode and do another beast drive. This feels like something that you would notice if you spent any time testing it, but again, this game didn't have the time or money it needed to make sure it wasn't horrifically busted. Sorry, Bloody Roar 4, but Konami just didn't have the money for testing. No, instead, they had to spend that budget on hiring a famous pop idol to dress up as a cat to promote the game. Yeah, that's true. Konami hired famous Japanese actress and singer Yuko Ogura to dress up as a cat to promote the game, which, I guess was probably a smart move, because considering how much worse this game looked, if you asked me what are we going to show from this in order to promote the game, my answer would have been anything not in the game. Then again, if you asked me, I probably also would have said that rather than spending this money on hiring a famous actress to promote the game, we should instead take that money and spend it on, you know, fixing the game. Also, there's no special cheats like in the last game, however, there is one new mode, Career Mode. In here, you fight through a series of battles to gain DNA points that you can use to unlock abilities and moves, or to unlock hidden characters like Koryu, Uranus, and Sheena and Long. Yeah, all the characters from Bloody Roar 3 return, but for some reason, 2 of the most standard characters in the entire franchise are now unlockables. And as for Career Mode itself, hey, I'm always a big fan of having single-player content. I always think it's an important idea to give people lots of stuff that you can do in your game. But I hate this gameplay so much that anything that encourages me to keep playing is actually a negative now. And it takes so long to unlock these characters. There's nothing interesting about these fights. These aren't the MK towers where they're all different. No, it's just a long string of one-round only fights across a grid. Each level of the grid increases how many points you get by 100, with the highest level being 800. And it costs 5,000 points to get Long, 10,000 points to get Sheena, 30,000 points to get Koryu, 50,000 for Uranus, and 100,000 for the game's final boss, and screw that noise. For this video, I spent an hour getting up to 30,000 points, but to do that, I did all the 800 and 700 point fights, so every fight after this would be for pennies, and it would take me forever. No, thank you. I'm going to die someday, and when I do, I don't want to look back at my life and say, thank goodness I spent that one weekend grinding to get Uranus. I'm good. So yeah, this game is bad. I might have had problems with elements of the previous games, but overall I still think they were each good games. You can totally criticize something and still like it. But this game isn't just bad by comparison to the other games, it is a legit bad game from almost every single angle. And the fact that we went from Primal Fury, the best reviewed game in the series, to this, just makes the drop in quality so much more clear. And again, speaking from personal experience, I said I never played Bloody Roar 3 because it was never available to rent. This game, I constantly saw it at my local video store, and yet I still never played it because this was around the time that I was paying more attention to game reviews, and I remember this thing just getting savaged. Every review I read said to stay away from this game, which people did. Sales numbers for Japan aren't available, but in the rest of the world, it sold only 90,000 copies. Roughly a fourth of what Bloody Roar 3 and Primal Fury each sold. Yeah, Bloody Roar sales were already starting to drop, but this was a plummet. And after these sales numbers and these horrible critical reviews, this ended up becoming the final Bloody Roar game. Bloody Roar 4 ended up killing the franchise. Well, does the story at least go out on a good note? Listen, I'll admit, I actually think the premise of the previous games are actually pretty good. On paper, I think they're solid stories, even if the execution is essentially what you'd expect from late 90s fighting games. But this story gets just flat out stupid and is way too overly convoluted. It picks up after the events of the last game. No, not the last game, the last game. Yeah, there you go. The hero stopped Zion, but he's still out there trying to resurrect the unborn. But during the events of the last game, Zion ended up mortally wounding a woman named Nagi. Well, turns out there's a yin to the unborn's yang. While the unborn was trying to destroy the Earth itself has its own will known as Gaia, and Gaia was going to create a champion to fight for it, and... Wait, am I still in the King of Fighters retrospective? I thought I was done with that. Am I trapped here forever? What's happening? Sorry, where was I? Right, okay, Gaia. Gaia needed to fight back against the unborn. So, as Nagi was dying, Gaia resurrected her, turning her into a zoanthrope to be its champion, even though all Nagi wants is just to be a human again. But Nagi does end up fighting Zion and even kills him and destroys the unborn. Hooray! The day is saved! Just one problem. How did Gaia give Nagi these powers? by copying the Unborn's powers, which causes Nagi herself to become possessed by a copy of the Unborn. So Gaia's plan to stop the Unborn was to make a copy of the Unborn. Wow, the plan is stupid. That's like saying, you know, Batman, the best way to outwit the Joker is just to inhale a whole bunch of his Joker toxins. That'll fix all of our problems. And yes, Nagi is now a zoanthrope. So what's her zoanthrope form? It's Witchblade. Yeah, her official animal form is called the Spurious, which essentially means a false forged copy, because she is just a copy of the Unborn. Okay, let's talk about this. Out of all the characters in this series who didn't turn to animals, there was Uranus and Kronos, but they turned into mythical animals, so they do keep the theme going while being fitting upgrades for a boss class animal. Then you got the Unborn, who isn't an animal in any way, but he's supposed to be an absolute evil devil, so transforming him into a demon is okay, I guess. And as I said, I'll give you one. You get one non-animal transformation. But this? Not only is this another non-animal transformation, its name literally translates to I'm just a flawed copy of that non-animal from the last game. And worst of all, she doesn't even fully transform. That's another reason that I give the Unborn a pass. He might not be an animal, but at least he does transform into something. Nagi is just Nagi, except that now she has a sword arm and she loses her top. Not that there was much of a top there to lose. Yeah, listen, I joke from time to time about how fighting games love their sex appeal, but most of the time, I'm just joking. I don't really have any kind of a problem with that. But Nagi is here just for sex appeal, to the point where she just ignores the premise of the game. It is so clear that they just looked at Nagi and said, we can't have Nagi transform into an animal. How is she still going to have a smoking hot bod that the player can ogle if she transforms into an animal? I mean, for God's sakes, just listen to the sound she makes whenever she gets hit. Konami, you know what you did there! So, with Nagi possessed by the Unborn, she makes her way to the shrine dedicated to Gaia to try and kill the Earth Spirit. But there are two other fires involved in this story. There's Reiji the Crow, a rebellious punk who really reminds you that these games were made with a specific fashion in mind. This dude looks like he's the lead singer of Crazy Town. Now, Reiji comes from a clan of monks, but after the B-sides from Bloody Roar 3 caused him to awaken his zoanthrope powers, he killed his father and went out looking for strong fighters to tear apart. Although the only thing he is tearing apart in this game is the frame rate. Yeah, I remind you, this game was crunched and they were working on this engine that they had no experience with, and because of that, if Reiji turns into his crow form on specific stages like the sewer or freezer stage, he causes the game to slow to a near crash. I mentioned the PS3 version of Bloody Roar 2 would slow down because it was poorly emulated. This is not an emulation. I am playing this on the disc itself. This is just how the game runs. Then the final new character, or characters, are the two Guardians of Gaia's Seal, a large martial arts monk named Ryoho, and Mana, the small priestess that he guards. These two act as the sub-boss of the game, and they actually have a fairly interesting idea behind them. This is the only compliment I can really give this game in its design. Ryoho doesn't have a zoanthrope form, at least not yet, but Mana does. So, if you go into Beast mode, Mana transforms into a tiny fox, and now your Beast attack button causes her to run out and attack like a puppet fighter, which helps to cover for Ryoho's slow speed and can lead to some really punching combinations. And once you lose your life bar, instead of reverting to your Beast gauge, Mana transforms back into a human, so she can't help you in battle anymore, but she does fully re-heal your life, which is an interesting way of playing around with this new Beast gauge. Except for one thing. Remember how you can hold the Beast button down to charge your Beast gauge by sacrificing your own life? Yeah, Ryoho can do that and charge his Beast gauge without sacrificing his life. Meaning, you can do your super, deplete your Beast gauge, then as the opponent is getting back up, you can charge your Beast meter again, so that way you can do your super again. Oh, and that super? Get a load of this. If you hit your opponent with your super, Mana does something. It's hard to tell because the camera angle is atrocious in this game. But then, it not only does damage to your opponent, it also completely depletes their beast gauge. And remember, if you have lost your main life bar, then your beast gauge becomes your new life bar. Meaning, if your opponent only has their beast gauge left, this move is an instant kill. But after you defeat Ryoho and Mana, you then move into the final boss. Turns out, Nagi isn't the only agent of Gaia trying to take out the Unborn. No, there was also Ryoho's Zoanthrope form, a massive dragon that since the dawn of time had been used by Gaia to wipe out anyone that threatened the planet. Unfortunately, once the dragon is set free, it's kinda hard to put him back in his cage. So, even if the Unborn is gone, that dragon doesn't want to go back and it still wants to destroy everything. This is our final boss fight, and it is both the hardest boss fight in the series and the easiest. Why is it the hardest? Because you only get one chance to beat him. You lose, that's it, game over. I know you might be thinking, wait, but Shenlong in Bloody Roar 2 and Uranus in Bloody Roar 3 also only gave you one chance to beat them. True, they did. They were also secret bosses. They were meant to be extra hard because they were bonuses. If you lost to them, you still got your arcade ending. You still technically beat the game. Congrats to you. This dragon isn't a secret boss. It's the actual boss of the game. Meaning you can play through the entire game, lose to him on the final match, and then that's it. You don't get your arcade ending. It just cuts to credits. You get nothing. Good day, sir. But as I said, he's also the easiest boss in the series, and that's because there are two tricks to beat him. One is just to spam the sidestep button, because yeah, he's big and he does huge damage, but he's also slow. Keep sidestepping, waiting for him to land next to you, going for a few hits, then back away and keep sidestepping. Do this in beast mode so that way you don't risk losing any of your actual life, and just repeat until you prevent the apocalypse. Done. Or if that sounds too risky to you, then here's the other secret to beating him. You ready for this? This is some pro gamer strats right here. Get ready for the secret tech that only the top tier players know. Block. I don't mean that in any kind of a sarcastic douchey way like, oh, just get good, noob, and learn how to block and punish. No, I mean the way to beat him is just to hold back and keep blocking. You do this for two reasons. One is because, remember how I said that when you use your beast drive, you use up some of your beast gauge? Well, Ryoho's dragon form only has beast gauge. It has no regular life bar. So just keep your distance and just keep blocking throughout the entire fight, and eventually he'll use his supers a few times, depleting his own beast gauge until he is reverted back to a human with 1 pixel of health. First time I saw that, I couldn't believe it. Did nobody stop and think, hey, wait a second, did we just invent a system where the boss kills himself? Hell, even if he doesn't use his supers, you're still going to win the match as long as you keep blocking, because since he only has his beast gauge, he technically starts the game at half health. Meaning, if the game goes into time over, as long as you kept blocking, you'll always win. By the way, I'm aware of the irony of telling you to block after spending this entire video decrying it, so don't bother pointing that out. Oh, and there's one more way that you can beat him. Remember how I said that Ryoho and Mana Super is an instant kill if you only have beast gauge left? Well, the boss starts with only beast gauge, but surely that wouldn't work on him, right? I mean, that would be ridiculous if that worked on the boss. There's no way it's going to... Please.
Knockout. You win.
I want you all right now to imagine the hardest boss fight you have ever had in a fighting game. Now imagine if there was one character in the game that just happened to have an instant kill against them. Gee, I'm beginning to think that they didn't have time to test this game before shipping it out to make sure it wasn't the dumbest thing they had ever created. Well, after she defeats the dragon, Nagi, being possessed by the Unborn copy, is about to destroy Gaia, only for Yugo to come running in and knock Nagi out, causing the Unborn to flee from her body. Oh god, that's the Unborn? Oh my god. It's rare that you can spotlight the exact second that a game ran out of time and money, but there it is. Well, Mana then seals the cardboard cutout that is supposed to be the unborn, and Nagi ends up destroying it. Nagi then learns that she can't go back to being a normal human, but she is okay with that, and everyone stands around laughing. And that is how this series ends. A game that was defined by a rebellious, edgy, grungy tone ends like it's a corny TGIF 90s sitcom.
You go.
Eh?
My memory's a little vague.
What?
Did you just beat me up?
Well, that...
I will say Ryoho's ending does go out on a little bit more of an appropriate tone. They wonder why the dragon is still fighting to get out of Ryoho, even if the unborn is no longer a threat to the planet, and he wonders if maybe it's because humans are the real threat to the planet. Kind of a ham-handed handling of that message, but hey, if you'll remember, the very first Bloody Roar game had a big, vague environmental message on their website to try and explain the zoanthropes, so I guess this is kind of a bookend. I guess it does at least go out on the same note that it started the series on, even if it does kind of imply that the reason why there's no more games after this is because Ryoho wiped out mankind. Wow, that's a bummer. So yes, that brings us to the end of this series. As I said, this game was a massive flop, and considering that Hudson was now being merged into Konami, it meant that only their best-selling properties were going to survive. And sadly, Bloody Roar was no longer one of Hudson's best-selling properties. And if you're hoping for a modern-day Bloody Roar revival, yeah, you can keep hoping. Because, as I said, 2003 Konami wasn't all that bad. But 2022 Konami is that bad. I don't need to go into details about, we all know how bad Konami is now. We all know their shady business practices, the bridges that they burn in the gaming industry. And sure, we are now seeing them once again taking an interest in video game development. But if you think we're getting a new Bloody Roar before a new Castlevania, Metal Gear, Contra, or any of the other multiple high-ranking Konami franchises, then I've got some bad news for you. And I know someone is going to point out that recently in the past few years, Konami did renew their copyright on Bloody Roar, meaning that there might still be hope and they might actually be interested in it. Guys, that's just what game studios do every couple of years with their old franchises to make sure that someone else doesn't sneak in and try and make money off of it without them. I say that as someone who every 5 years has to hear people say, "Hey, did you hear that Capcom recently renewed their Darkstalkers license? Does that mean that a new game is coming?" Nope, it just means they don't want to sell it to someone who would make a new game. Which is a shame because honestly, Konami should be interested in Bloody Roar. Because Konami has been struggling for years to figure out live service gaming. How can we sell a game that forces players to keep coming back and spending money on one update after another? Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but the fighting game genre has kind of cracked the code on that. Fighting games are some of the most successful examples of live services these days. So if anyone should be trying to bring back a fighting game, it's Konami. Or hell, I'd be happy with just a re-release of their old games. I give Konami a lot of grief, but I have to admit, the one thing that they're doing well right now is their re-releases. A Bloody Roar collection like the Cowabunga collection or the Castlevania collection would be perfect. But sadly, it doesn't look like that's happening. And unfortunately, in terms of official continuation to the franchise, Yugo guest appeared in the platform fighter Dream Mix TV World Fighters, where he went up against other Konami characters like Simon Belmont and Bomberman, and against just whoever they could get the rights to, like Optimus Prime and the kid from Beyblade. This game is real. So the characters didn't live on, but what about the developers? Well, many of the people from the original games are still working in the industry today, although sadly, the game's primary director, Kenji Fukuya, has essentially vanished off the face of the earth. Yeah, earlier when I said that he only worked on the Bloody Roar series, I wasn't kidding. He never worked on another game, and I can't find any social media presence for him. The closest clue I can find to his whereabouts is that there was a patchy slot machine for the Musou Samurai Warriors games, and Giant Bomb lists him as an uncredited director on the game. because that's a role that doesn't normally get credited, the director. And nobody else out there is listing him as having worked on this game. Yeah, I'm not buying this. I think someone was just messing with the wiki. No, I like to think that the old Beast King finished up Bloody Roar and then he just walked down to the wilderness, joined his animal brethren and watching over all the beast fighters out there and cheering them on like some sort of a mythical cryptid who returned to his home. However, even if Konami has shoved this game into the back of their storage locker and lost the combination, even if its fabled Beast King has gone missing, there is one bit of legacy from this game that has made a massive impact on the fighting game world. I mentioned this game started because Hudson wanted to make a fighting game, so they went to another young developer, Rising, and this became Rising's first fighting game franchise. Well, the entire fighting game world took notice of this. Sure, I've told you the sales of these games, so they were never all that impressive. They never hit the numbers of Street Fighter or Tekken. But other fighting game developers looked at Bloody Roar and they said, hey, these games are incredibly new player friendly while still being loaded with mechanics that open up for more complex and competitive gameplay. That's exactly what we're looking for. And as a result, Rising would go on to be hired by Capcom and Arc Systems to make games for them. Although, you might not know them by that name. No, halfway through the Bloody Roar series, they changed their name from Rising to 18. Yeah, that's right. The same 18 behind this. And this. And this. And oh yeah, a little title you might remember called
Marvel vs. Capcom 3.
That's right, 18 has spent the last couple decades making beloved fighting games, cult classics, and even the massively successful Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which to this day is considered to be one of the best fighting games of all time, and they got their start all thanks to Bloody Roar. And in the end, that might be the longest, most impressive legacy of this franchise. Well, that, and also the fan base. As I pointed out several times, this series sold just okay numbers. So why are we still talking about this much? Why is it brought up so much more than other fighting games that sold even more than this? That's because this game hit something in its fan base. It struck an exact chord with an audience, something that stuck with them throughout the years, and if a game can do that, then it will live on well past its releases. Heck, just think about this. This game premiered in 1997, a time when the fighting game scene was tanking. 2 years after this was when many people considered this generation of fighting games to be dead. And yet this game got 5 installments and kept going for years after the death of the arcade scene. That is a remarkable achievement and speaks to the dedication of the fan base. And that fan base is still going strong to this day, even going so far as to create content for this series, even when Konami would not. In the past few years, famous voice actors Casey Mongillo and Kira Buckland actually brought together plenty of other big-name voice actors to do a fan dub of Bloody Roar 2 that you can actually download. And it's insane that this thing exists. I always love seeing fan dubs. I think it's cool that young, hopeful voice actors come together to do passion projects like this. But this is the first time I've actually seen big-name professional actors doing this.
You're lucky it wasn't a full moon.
And then earlier this very year, Bloody Roar Extreme became one of the featured games at Combo Breaker, one of the biggest fighting game tournaments in the world. That is an insane achievement for a 20-year-old game to just suddenly rise like a phoenix. And it just goes to show the passion that this community has and how much the gameplay still holds up. I watched that tournament and it was the very first time that I had ever seen high-level competitive Bloody Roar, and my mind was being blown by what I was seeing. it made me realize that a game I already loved had so much more to it than I thought. So yes, the series is dead, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Because thanks to the fan base keeping it in our minds, thanks to creators coming out and making brand new content even after all these years, thanks to the players who are keeping the tournaments running, and thanks to everyone out there who just loves the idea of a fighting game full of werewolves and chimeras and half-beast and yes, even the occasional unborn, this game will never be forgotten and it'll always be...
Ready to go another round?
Thank you guys so much for joining us today for our Bloody Roar retrospective. This is one that I've been wanting to do ever since we started the fighting game retrospective, so it was great to finally cover it, especially here for Halloween on its 25th anniversary. If you guys like this video and you want to see more stuff like that, then make sure that you click that subscribe button. We're trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you haven't subscribed yet and you've been enjoying our stuff, then make sure that you click that button down there. And if you want to help this channel grow, the best way to do that is just to give us a thumbs up, just to leave a comment down below. It lets YouTube know to share these videos around. Or if you just want to share these videos around the web wherever you think someone might enjoy it, that really does go a long way to helping us out. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Thory'sArcade in order to keep up to date with all the future plans that we have. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Stay safe out there, and happy Halloween.